The trail was gone when he woke up. By sunset, his map was missing too. He spent hours searching for the path back, but every direction led deeper into the forest. Then, just before midnight, he heard someone call his name from outside the tent. The next morning, he found something in the dirt, and that's when he realized he wasn't alone. 3 days earlier, Ethan had planned the trip as a simple weekend escape. The trail was well known among local hikers and easy enough to complete in 2 days. According to the map, the route followed a marked path through miles of forest before looping back to the parking area. He arrived shortly after sunrise and started hiking while the air was still cool. For most of the day, everything went exactly as expected. The trail markers were easy to follow. The weather was clear, and the forest felt peaceful. By late afternoon, Ethan found a small clearing beside a narrow stream and decided to make camp for the night. After setting up his tent, he spent the next hour exploring the area before returning to the campsite as the sun began to disappear behind the trees. That's when he noticed something strange. The forest had become unusually quiet. No birds, no insects, no movement. Even the stream seemed quieter than before. Ethan stood beside the campfire, listening. For a few seconds, the silence felt almost unnatural. Then somewhere beyond the trees, a branch snapped. The next morning, Ethan left camp shortly after sunrise. His plan was simple: follow the trail back to the main route, continue the hike, and return home the following day. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The forest looked exactly the same as it had the day before. The stream was still there. The campsite was untouched. But when Ethan reached the trail, he stopped. The path was gone. He checked the map. Then he checked the ground again. The trail marker he had passed the previous evening was still standing exactly where he remembered it, but the trail itself seemed to end a few yards beyond it. There was no clear path, no footprints, no sign that anyone had walked there recently. For nearly an hour, Ethan searched the surrounding area. Every direction looked identical. Tall trees, dense undergrowth, the same endless stretch of forest. Eventually, he convinced himself he must have taken a wrong turn the previous day. Maybe he had wandered farther from the route than he realized. Maybe the trail was nearby, and he simply hadn't found it yet. By late afternoon, Ethan realized he hadn't seen a single sign of another person all day. No hikers, no campsites, no fresh tracks, nothing. Considering how popular the trail was supposed to be, that didn't make sense. When Ethan returned to camp that evening, something immediately felt wrong. At first, he couldn't explain it. The tent was still there. His backpack was untouched. Nothing appeared damaged. But after a few seconds, he noticed what was missing. His map. The folded trail map he had used throughout the trip was gone. Ethan searched the campsite twice. Then a third time, he checked inside the tent. Inside his backpack. Every pocket, every container, nothing. The map had disappeared. For several minutes, he tried convincing himself he had simply misplaced it. But that didn't make sense. He remembered using it earlier that day. After sunset, he searched the area around the campsite using his flashlight. The forest looked different at night. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every tree looked unfamiliar. The farther he searched, the less certain he became of where he was. Eventually, Ethan returned to the tent. The trail was gone. The map was gone. And now the only thing guiding him back was memory. For the first time since arriving, he began to consider the possibility that he might not find a way out. Then, somewhere beyond the trees, he heard a voice. It sounded exactly like his name. Ethan remained awake long after hearing the voice. Sitting inside the tent, he listened for movement beyond the canvas walls, but the forest stayed silent. No footsteps, no second call. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and sometime after midnight, he fell asleep. A sudden crunch woke him. The sound came from outside the tent, like someone stepping on dry leaves. Ethan sat upright and listened. A few moments later, it came again, closer this time. Grabbing his flashlight, he carefully stepped outside. The campsite was empty. Nothing moved between the trees. As he swept the flashlight across the ground, something caught his attention. Footprints. Fresh footprints surrounded the tent. Ethan followed them with the beam. They emerged from the forest, circled the campsite, then disappeared back into the darkness. He stared at them for several seconds. The footprints didn't belong to him. At least, he didn't think they did. The rest of the night passed without sleep. Then, just before sunrise, he heard the voice again. Someone quietly spoke his name from deep within the forest. This time, the voice sounded familiar. The voice returned shortly after sunrise. At first, it was distant, barely audible through the trees. Then, it came again. "Ethan." He froze. The voice sounded familiar, almost like someone he knew, but he couldn't place it. For several minutes, he stood motionless, listening as it called his name from somewhere deeper in the forest. Then he made a decision. Grabbing his backpack, Ethan followed it. The voice never repeated the same distance twice. Sometimes it sounded close enough to reach. Other times it seemed much farther away. Still, he continued moving toward it. Hours passed. The forest became denser. The terrain grew harder to navigate. Then Ethan stepped into a clearing and stopped. His tent stood in front of him. For several seconds, he couldn't move. The same tent, the same campsite, the same stream. Everything was exactly where he had left it. But that was impossible. He had been walking for hours. Slowly, Ethan backed away from the clearing. Then he heard the voice again. This time, it came from directly behind him. Ethan spun around. The forest behind him was empty. No movement, no footsteps, no sign of anyone nearby. For several seconds, he stood frozen, sweeping the flashlight through the trees. The voice didn't return. Then something changed. The forest was quiet again, completely quiet. A feeling of panic settled in as Ethan realized he no longer knew which direction he had come from. Every path looked the same. Every tree looked familiar. He started walking, then faster, then running. But the forest never seemed to end. Several days later, search teams arrived after Ethan failed to return home. They found the campsite quickly. The tent was still standing. His backpack was inside. His flashlight was lying beside the entrance. The trail was visible. The stream was exactly where it should have been. Everything appeared normal. Everything except Ethan. He was never found. Before leaving, one member of the search team noticed something attached to a tree near the campsite. It was Ethan's missing map, pinned to the trunk, miles from where it should have been. If you enjoy immersive survival horror stories, like this video and subscribe to In the Shadow for more stories where survival and reality slowly begin to fall apart.